nation will endure as it has endured.
Our long national nightmare is over.
Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
Welcome to Planet America. Still trying to impersonate John Barron, I'm Casey Briggs.
And still trying to impersonate a human being, I'm Chaz the Chidolo.
This week, Guantanamo Bay, detaining prisoners for nearly 2 decades, many without charge. Now, said to be tougher than ever.
And is Joe Biden going to be denied the body of Christ? Dr. Julia Baird joins me at the Fireside to discuss that and more. But first...
The great American tradition of the filibuster is back, with Senate Republicans this week unanimously voting to block sweeping legislation aimed at expanding voting rights. The For the People Act was seen by Democrats as one of their highest priorities, a push back against several bills in Republican-led state legislatures that Democrats say will limit voter access, particularly among black and minority communities. But Republicans claim the bill is a massive overreach into state elections. And wielding the Senate filibuster, they stopped the legislation before it could be debated.
Every single Senate Republican just voted against starting debate on legislation to protect Americans' voting rights.
Of course, the Democrats didn't have to force this to a vote this week, but doing so served as another bash on the doors of the filibuster in Chuck Schumer's battering ram attack against the institution. In blocking the bill, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell claimed there was nothing to see here.
There's nothing broken around the country. The system upheld very well during intense stress. Therefore, there's no point in having an election in the U.S., a debate in the U.S. Senate about something we ought not to do.
Now, we need to be careful here because there are actually multiple bills on the table. One is the For the People Act you described, Casey, which actually does have a number of quite partisan measures. But then Joe Manchin put together a compromise proposal which was significantly more moderate and incorporated a number of Republican ideas. And both bills were up for debate during this process. Now, to her credit, activist Stacey Abrams endorsed Manchin's compromise.
Joe Manchin, people have been asking him exactly what could you support. He has now laid it out. Some of those proposals would be significant changes in requirements from state to state. Is that a compromise you could support?
Absolutely.
But then, to Senator Roy Blunt's discredit, he exploited that endorsement to club Manchin around the head a bit.
I actually think when Stacey Abrams immediately endorsed Senator Manchin's proposal, it became the Stacey Abrams substitute, not the Joe Manchin substitute.
Come on, you don't have to support Manchin's proposal, but don't punish his good faith efforts to seek consensus. I mean, look at this Mitch McConnell statement about Manchin's compromise. The plan endorsed by Stacey Abrams is no compromise. It still subverts the First Amendment to supercharge cancel culture and the left's name and shame campaign model. I've got no idea what any of that means, but let's go on. It takes away from state legislatures and hands it over to computers. In other words, it stops state legislatures from gerrymandering their district boundaries. And it's an assault on the fundamental idea that the states, not the federal government, should decide how to run their own elections. The Constitution says that the federal government has control over federal elections, which is what we're talking about. And by the way, Mitch McConnell's voted a number of times to pass laws about federal elections. They seem to be testing out just how much Manchin's going to put up with to protect the filibuster. Good news for Republicans, though, is even if Manchin does lose his patience, the filibuster is going to stay unless Manchin and moderate Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema both vote to kill it. They need 50 votes. And Sinema, she reiterated her support for the filibuster just this week. So lefties got to work on her.
Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema is failing us. Instead of voting for a living wage, she chose to hurt those who need help most, instead of protecting our democracy with so much at stake.
Will there be an independent commission to look into the January 6th attack on the Capitol?
She didn't even show up. And as the GOP tries to silence our voices, she's just standing by, supporting a Jim Crow relic instead.
Ah, Casey, attack ads, another great American tradition.
Thumbs down.
Yeah.
It's not all scorched earth politics in Washington, though, with the announcement of a potential bipartisan infrastructure deal.
Really good meeting. And to answer your direct question, we have a deal.
President Biden has expressed his support for the deal thrashed out by a bipartisan group of over 20 senators, which is set to cost $1.2 trillion over 8 years. But there are some sticking points, Chaz.
There certainly are. Firstly, we still don't know how this bill is going to get paid for, and there are some potential landmines there, let me tell you. It also appears as if this deal might jettison a lot of the climate change program funding that Biden originally proposed. The left are never going to go for that.
No climate, no deal. That's the only way in which we can respond. This bill has to meet the magnitude of the challenges which the climate crisis is presenting to our country and to the planet.
And of course, they're going to need every single vote. So the way Biden's going to try and get around that is with a two-track deal where it's passed in tandem with a separate budget reconciliation bill that only Democrats vote for.
The bipartisan bill from the very beginning was understood there's going to have to be the second part of it. Not just signing the bipartisan bill and forgetting about the rest that I proposed.
So would Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema vote for that? Manchin says a reconciliation bill is inevitable. And Sinema, she's apparently open to it as well. Okay, but what about the Republicans? Are they going to agree to that obvious workaround of their desires? Mitch McConnell said it almost makes your head spin. An expression of bipartisanship and then an ultimatum on behalf of your left-wing base? That's not the way to show you're serious about getting a bipartisan outcome. So that might be the sticking point. But if getting screwed over bothers McConnell, maybe you should speak to Joe Manchin. He'd sympathise.
That's all about it. Still in Congress, and the House has voted 268 to 161 to revoke the 2002 law that authorised war in Iraq. It's only come 10 years after American troops supposedly left the country. That was 49 Republicans and 219 Democrats supporting the repeal, for those counting. Senator Mitch McConnell, however, does not support the repeal at all, stating the legal and practical application of the 2002 AUMF extends far beyond the defeat of Saddam Hussein's regime.
Which is exactly the point, of course. I think Mitch McConnell might have missed that. You shouldn't be using an authorisation for military force in Iraq to justify a military force in other countries decades later. If you want to use force in those countries, get yourself a new authorisation, hey?
It's not over yet, though. Over in the Senate, 5 members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee are trying to delay the bill's movement onto the Senate floor. Ron Johnson, Bill Haggerty, Mitt Romney, Michael Rounds and Marco Rubio say they need further study of the issues. Hey, it's only been 19 years. Give them some time.
I will not rush them, do not worry. Look, it's especially ridiculous because even without the 2002 authorisation, there's still the 2001 authorisation. That's to use force against those nations, organisations or persons the President determines planned, authorised, committed or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on 9/11. That there has already been used to justify airstrikes in Afghanistan, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, Yemen. It's been used to justify Gitmo. It's been used to justify troop deployments in the Philippines, Kenya, Eritrea and Georgia.
It's a short list.
Yeah, I think they're going to be okay, Case.
Talking about Guantanamo Bay, there's been some activity there as well, at least kind of. 11 of the remaining 40 detainees there have now been cleared for release. Unfortunately for them, though, the State Department's yet to name someone to negotiate with other governments to take them.
And some of these detainees aren't exactly imposing. One of the detainees cleared to go is now 74 years old and with heart disease. We should say, by the way, that only 5% of Gitmo detainees were actually apprehended by American troops, and only 4% more were even alleged to have been fighting at all against anyone. Furthermore, while 21% of those released under Bush did return to the theatre of war, America tightened the process right up under Obama. Now, only 4.8% of those released under Obama returned to war.
So that's the people that leave. For those who stay, the conditions aren't getting any better. There are now complaints the guards are forbidden from even speaking to the inmates. There are broken toilets and burnt out light bulbs, and basics like aspirin and band-aids no longer available to detainees.
In other words, there are a whole lot of questions that need to be asked. So let's find some answers. Professor Gail Helt is a former CIA analyst who spent 2 years working with the Obama administration to transfer detainees from Guantanamo. She's written an open letter now to President Biden urging him to close the prison. And she joins me now from King University in Tennessee. Professor, welcome to Planet America.
Thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Now, apparently there are 11 Gitmo detainees who have been cleared to go, but none of them are actually going anywhere. So is any real progress being made there?
You ask if there's any real movement. They have not appointed anyone at the State Department to fill the position of special envoy for Guantanamo. And that person is charged with negotiating resettlement deals, making sure that there are security guarantees for the detainees' protection, but also for anyone who might be anxious, their protection as well, making sure those negotiations are worked out. Making sure that the detainees are comfortable with where they might be resettling, getting them up to making sure that they're being brought up to speed on the culture and language of the place that they might wind up in. And there's no one there in that position to organize this kind of effort. And that is absolutely necessary for someone to be in that position for this process to really get off the ground. I know President Biden wants to close Guantanamo. I have no reason at all to doubt his sincerity there. He finds Guantanamo to be reprehensible. It's a symbol of abuses and torture and all of those things, and he wants it closed. But there's some big things he needs to do before that can happen, before detainees can be even moved out of there. And I don't see movement there, and that concerns me.
Some people have been charged with crimes and they should go to trial. Is there any talk of those trials actually taking place, either in Gitmo or in America?
That's a really good question as well. I believe that they're still in the pre-trial hearing stage for the 9/11 plotters, which means there really is no planned trial in sight. It was supposed to start, I believe the target date had been January of 2021. Obviously, that didn't happen, COVID and a number of other reasons. You have a revolving door of judges who take on that position and then leave. Sometimes it seems like before there's even a single hearing. I mean, that may be a slight exaggeration, but it's not very much of one. I could be dead before the trials ever happen. You could be dead before those trials ever happen. But the military commissions, they weren't designed to be a legitimate judicial process. They were designed to do exactly what they're doing, keeping these men in limbo so that they had never have the opportunity to talk about the torture that they suffered. And I think that's key here. And that's one of the things that people don't really understand. It's like, well, it's unwieldy. Yeah, it's unwieldy for a reason. And there's almost nothing you can do short of an act of Congress at this point to shift that into anything that it's other than what it is. Unless Congress gets a spine and decides to uphold the Constitution and actually bring those men here and finally pursue justice.
Now, you were part of the prisoner review process under Obama. How do they decide whether someone's safe to release?
So for 2 years, I provided support to that process. And I certainly was not in the deliberations. I kind of had, I was aware of them, certainly. I knew what was going on. It's basically at the point that they're at now, it's not even a review as much of what they were accused of doing back in 2001 or 2002 or whenever they were captured. It's at least as much, if not more so, how have they behaved since then? What's their behavior been like? Is there remorse for what they did? Do they hate the United States? Are they safe to be, released into society? There's an element of that as well. And so they're weighing the risks, I think, to society versus the very real need to get these men back home. I mean, the fact is we talk about risks as though they were really terrorists when we picked them up. And a lot of them simply were not. You had people who were like Ahmad Rabbani, who was a taxi driver from Karachi, who was picked up because we thought he was another guy. And we admitted that we had a case of mistaken identity, and we have not released him. He is still in prison. He has a child who's 18 years old who he's never met, and he wants to go home. And he's on a hunger strike because he feels like that's the only way he's going to ever get out, one way or the other. Either the hunger strike is going to move people or he's going to die. So was there ever really a risk to the United States government from this taxi driver? Right, from Karachi? Did he pose a risk to me? I don't think that he did. And he wasn't even the guy that we thought that he was, right? So this whole notion that we have to assess his risk, there was never a risk to really assess. So even in this process, there's this game that goes on. And for the life of me, 20 years later, I don't understand why.
Just to clarify, you're saying that the government admits that this guy is the wrong person.
Yes.
And he's
Yes.
still in jail 20 years later in Gitmo.
Pretty close to 20 years later, yes. I think it's 18, but yes. You can go to the Senate torture report. His story is mentioned in there. Yeah, absolutely. That has been declassified. It's shameful. I don't understand this. And this man hasn't even been cleared yet, right? You've got 11 others who have been cleared for transfer. This man's brother has been cleared. This man has not been cleared yet, and I, for the life of me, will never understand why. It makes no sense.
On a slightly different tack, where are all the bad guys then? I mean, because America's been fined someone for the last 20 years, haven't they?
In the terms of bad guys,
yeah.
I think there are, I might be a little off on this number. Math is not my thing. I think there are 12 individuals, maybe a couple more, who either are facing charges or who have been charged. There were 779 men who went through Guantanamo. If 765 men had wanted to harm the United States, I guarantee, and there was evidence to support the fact that they did, I guarantee we would have prosecuted them. So where are the bad guys, and why do we have to have a prison offshore that costs America $13 million a year per detainee to maintain? Why do we have to have that for the 12 bad guys who went through there, right? It's absolutely ridiculous on the moral sense, on the legal sense, and on the fiscally responsible arena too. It's just appalling.
Talk to us more about these fears about Americans have about these prisons, because it seems odd to me. America is a place with a lot of really bad crimes, and why are they so scared of these particular people?
This is something I don't understand, and I hate to say this. Well, I will say it because I think it's true. There's a racist element here, right? These are them. These are brown people. These are Muslim people. These are people who most of America does not understand and does not want to understand. And I think that uncertainty and that fear and that anxiety has a lot to do with this. We can't say we don't want them here because they're Muslim. Most of us are too polite to say that. But you can say, I'm really afraid that the Supermax will become a shrine to Al-Qaeda or the next target for a terrorist attack. And that concerns me, and I can't put my state through that. We can say that without feeling like we're being racist, because you're trying to avoid a terrorist attack. But the fact is, Charles Manson was held in California for decades. And did any of his cult followers or anyone who was infatuated with him go and try to break him out or commit crime near the prison? No. We've got 660 at least terrorists who are held in various federal prisons throughout this country. There's never been an event. There's never been like an attempt to break them out or people going and holding a protest. That just doesn't happen. Finally,
tell me what you think is going to happen over the next 20 years to Guantanamo Bay.
Well, the reality is, if President Biden is not successful in however long, his 4 years or 8 years, I believe that we will be talking about Guantanamo in 20 years, because the fact is very few Americans are concerned about this. Very few Americans even remember that it's there. Very few Americans can bring themselves to care about the well-being of people who they believe want to harm us, even though that's a false belief in most cases. That's just the belief they've been indoctrinated with, and they just can't really get their mind around anything else. So in 20 years, if Biden's not successful, we'll still be talking about this. I think you'll have certainly you'll have fewer detainees there. I do believe that Biden will move out those who are cleared. I do think that there is a great chance, unfortunately, that in 20 years you do have folks like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah and some others who are still stuck there in that hellhole. And at that point, in 20 years, I hate to say it, but who cares? And I care. I will still care in 20 years. But most people are not like me. Most people aren't like the people who advocate for these men. And that's a shame. They're still human beings, right? They're still created in the image of God. America prides itself. A segment of America prides itself on saying we're a Christian nation. A lot of us have forgotten that. A lot of us have forgotten what that actually means when it comes to treating other people, and when it comes to not hating our enemies. And we don't know how to do anything but hate our enemies at this point. And that's really sad, and it's impacting our foreign policy and our standing in the world.
Professor Gail Helt, thank you for visiting Planet America.
Thank you so much.
The sun never sets on election season in America, and this week, all eyes in the US were on municipal matters. And congratulations are in order for India Walton, the Democratic nominee and highly likely next mayor of Buffalo.
Mommy! I won! Mommy, I'm the mayor of Buffalo! Well, not January, but yeah!
And that is the kind of commitment to public service that I want to see more of in America, Chaz.
Surely that is the first time the phrase, "Mummy, I'm a mayor," has ever been used by anyone.
Good catchphrase. But there was another mayoral race that captured the nation's attention this week.
One of the biggest political prizes of 2021. This race is a classic New York free-for-all, but it's also the largest election anywhere in the country by far since the end of the Trump presidency and since we've turned the corner on the pandemic.
So the winner of the Democratic primary for mayor of New York has a pretty good shot of winning the general election in November in a city that tends to vote blue. And for the first time, New York's decided to try a slice of democracy, Australian style.
We have got to talk about ranked choice voting.
Folks are going to be able to rank their choices from 1 to 5.
Well, it was a little confusing to begin with.
Well, yeah, happy ranked choice primary day to you.
Americans, they will declare a holiday over anything, Chaz. So who won? Well, we don't know. These are the first preferences from polling day. We still don't have any of the absentee ballots, and we've seen before how dramatically absentee ballots can swing results in America. But the relatively moderate and friend of the show, Eric Adams, is well ahead on the first preference vote. That makes him the front runner.
New York City said our first choice is Eric Adams.
Yeah! But there are two others, Maya Wiley and Catherine Garcia, who could still win it from here.
They certainly could. You just saw the first 700,000 ballots counted. That's what Casey just showed you. But there are more than 220,000 absentee ballots somewhere out there. And we won't see even some of them counted until July 6. New York's actually talking about an actual result coming out during the week of July 12. Come on!
Have patience, have patience. I can tell you, though, who won't win: the exuberant Andrew Yang. He was unsuccessful at running for president, now unsuccessful at running for mayor. He conceded a few hours after polls closed.
I am a numbers guy. I'm someone who traffics in what's happening by the numbers, and I am not going to be the next mayor of New York City based upon the numbers that have come in tonight.
I don't know, Chaz, do you reckon that Yang's loss has anything at all to do with the slightly unsettling way he's always sticking up his thumb?
What is it with Americans and thumbs? Kirsten Sinema's thumbs down, his thumbs up, just everyone's thumbs all over the place.
Get your thumbs out of it. According to an Ipsos poll during the campaign, one of the top issue in one of the cities hit hardest by the pandemic was not COVID-19. The top issue was crime and violence. 46% of New Yorkers ranking it as one of the main problems facing New York. If Eric Adams, a former cop, does come out on top next month, it's probably partly due to his campaign focused on crime and public safety.
Speaking of crime, President Biden has expressed support for removing one of the most blatant remaining injustices in the American legal system. They're finally hoping to end the federal sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine offences. The two kinds of cocaine are chemically the same, yet the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which Biden co-sponsored at the time, created a 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. So 5 grams of crack cocaine attracted the same penalty as 500 grams of powder cocaine. Even last year, black people made up 77% of all federal crack convictions. So this was a license to hit black people with much longer sentences than white people for similar drug crimes. Although not everyone's on the same page about what to do, Senator Tom Cotton tweeted, "Let's fix this by increasing the penalty for selling powder cocaine, not by letting drug traffickers out of prison."
Okay, so for most people other than Tom Cotton, the drug war is over 50 years to the week after it began. At the peak of the drug war in 2005, drug arrests had more than tripled in 25 years, totalling 1.8 million drug arrests a year. Drug incarcerations had increased 1,100% over the same period, with 500,000 people incarcerated for drug crimes. Black people comprised 14% of drug users, but 37% of arrests, and 56% of people in state prisons for drug crimes. And thanks to the crack powder cocaine inequality, black people were serving almost the same amount of time for drug offences that white people were serving for violent offences.
But today, things are changing. 68% of Americans support full legalization of marijuana, quite a few more than the 12% who supported it back when the drug war began. About 44% of the population now lives in one of the 19 states where marijuana is fully legal. The legal marijuana industry is now worth $18 billion and supports the equivalent of 300,000 full-time jobs.
And it's not just marijuana that's seen changes. Maine has reduced the consequences for possession of all scheduled drugs from a crime to a fine. And in Oregon, possessing heroin now gets you a $100 fine or an assessment for treatment.
It is all very different to the environment this week 50 years ago when Richard Nixon made that fateful speech. So why don't we remind ourselves what the world was like in their own words?
At the current rate, the crimes of violence in America will double by 1972. We cannot accept that kind of future for America.
President Nixon formally asked Congress today to step up the fight against drug addiction.
The president wants $155 million in new funds to finance methadone experimental treatment centers in big cities at home and among servicemen overseas, and research into new, less controversial, non-addictive drug cures.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
Despite resistance from various federal agencies, Mr. Nixon is setting up a new White House office to coordinate all anti-drug activities.
Once upon a time, in a famous story, a girl named Alice got very curious about a little white rabbit who passed by.
Just take a few amphetamines and you can be like me.
Schools are being pressured into responding to the unprecedented problems of drug abuse. Many schools have reacted by inviting independent drug programs into the classroom.
I don't think it's necessarily true that anyone who tries pot needs psychiatric help.
Yeah, I mean, you say some of them smoke and don't need psychiatric help. Well, I have 6 people that I counted friends who use marijuana, and they never did graduate to heroin. You know why? Because on marijuana, they committed crimes of passion and were electrocuted before they got a chance to get hooked on horse.
What is the worst drug boys and girls can take?
The worst drug that boys and girls can take is LSD, acid.
Pill poppers of all descriptions share a need for some kind of internal or external change.
How are you getting on?
Oh, so far, just terrible. And this? What's H mean?
Heroin. Why nobody feels safe.
They say people addicted to heroin have a monkey on their back. Isn't that cute?
The government's become increasingly involved in combating the heroin plague. Washington now admits there is a serious drug problem among its servicemen in Vietnam.
You're out of the service, just got home, and you're glad it's over. But maybe it's not really over because you brought a drug problem home with you.
In an address before the American Medical Association, President Nixon has called on the nation's doctors to launch an extensive program to educate the American people in the perils of drug abuse.
He ended today's visit by warning doctors that they had better get more involved in politics if they don't want socialized medicine.
What did you take today? Fix the pusher. Call Heroin Hotline in Washington, D.C. It's run by the federal government.
One thing you can say for America's war on drugs, it makes great television.
Joe Biden is famously America's second only Catholic president, and a devout one at that, regularly attending Mass and making public statements of faith. But possibly still not Catholic enough for America's Roman Catholic bishops. This month, the Catholic Bishops' Conference voted 3/4 in favour of drafting a formal statement on the meaning of communion. The proposed statement's being seen as a way to pressure bishops to deny communion to Catholic politicians who are seen to be pro-choice on abortion.
Now, some bishops argued that this wasn't singling out pro-choice politicians, and the proposal for the statement did say it would be addressed to all Catholics. And they also said it would be a special call for Catholics who are cultural, political or parochial leaders to promote their faith.
However, Several participants have referred directly to Biden's pro-choice attitudes as driving their support for the document. The Diocese of Baker, Oregon, said, "We've never had a situation like this where the executive is a Catholic president who's opposed to the teaching of the church." President Biden's played the controversy down.
How do you feel personally about that?
That's a private matter, and I don't think that's going to happen. Thank you.
But his staff, well, they had a little bit more to say.
He goes to church, as you know, nearly every weekend. He even went when we were on our overseas trip. But it's personal to him. He doesn't see it through a political prism, and we're not going to comment otherwise on the inner workings of the Catholic Church.
There's also been some resistance within the church itself, with one bishop warning that once we legitimate public policy-based Eucharistic exclusion, we will invite all of the political animosities that so tragically divide our nation into the very heart of Eucharistic celebration. That sacrament, which seeks to make us one, will become for millions of Catholics a sign of division. And the top doctrinal official at the Vatican diplomatically suggested that any statement of the conference regarding Catholic political leaders would be best framed within the broad context of worthiness for the reception of Holy Communion on the part of all the faithful. The strange thing about this is that any controversy seems kind of unnecessary because the conference doesn't actually have the authority to decide who can or cannot receive communion. That power is reserved for the local bishop, and he does not support denying communion to Biden.
The final statement is still a ways off. They'll meet in November to vote, but it needs a 2/3 support to get it through. And likely the sign-off from the Vatican as well, which, as you say, may be reluctant to make what would be such a public stand against the office of the president.
Yeah, it is a bit of a tough situation for Catholics though, because on one hand, 56% of American Catholics believe that abortion should be legal in most or all cases. That's a pro-choice majority. And only 29% of American Catholics believe Biden should be denied communion because of his views on abortion. Although admittedly, more Catholics who attend Mass weekly are against Biden. That's 40% of weekly Mass attendees wanting Biden denied communion to 25% of non-weekly attending Catholics. But that's the thing. All these Catholics might be pro-choice, but actual doctrine for the Catholic Church amongst the devout is very anti-abortion. Before he was Pope, Cardinal Ratzinger wrote that not all moral issues have the same moral weight as abortion and euthanasia. He explicitly said that different views on capital punishment or the decision to wage war would not lead to communion issues. He said there may be a legitimate diversity of opinion, even amongst Catholics, about waging war and applying the death penalty, but not, however, with regard to abortion and euthanasia. And the Catechism, that says under formal cooperation in an abortion, that the person who procures a completed abortion incurs excommunication. I suppose the question is, does being a pro-choice politician count as formal cooperation in an abortion? Especially when the Obama-Biden administration oversaw a dramatic fall in actual abortion numbers, far outpacing the Bush years. So, what counts? Ideology or actual abortion numbers? It's all very confusing, so let's ask an expert. Journalist and author Michael O'Loughlin covers religion and politics for America magazine, and he joins me from Chicago. Mike, welcome to Planet America.
Good to be here.
So, could you take us through the process that any potential statement has to go through before it could have some teeth?
The first step is for a committee in the Bishops' Conference to bring it to the administrative committee and say we want to pass a statement about this topic. The administrative committee considers it, takes a vote, and then presents it to the full body of bishops. Then 50% plus one, a simple majority of bishops has to say, yes, we want something to be drafted. That's what happened when bishops met to consider this document on the Eucharist. Now the drafting committee will take a look at input from various bishops, and they'll come up with a statement, in this case on the Eucharist, and they'll present it to the full bishops body for an amendment process where bishops can suggest changes. They'll make those changes or reject those changes, and then bring it back to the bishops when they meet in November. And that will require a 2/3 vote, so a slightly higher threshold. At that point, it will have been reviewed by Rome. The Vatican can say, yes, we think you can go ahead with this statement, or no, we don't think you should. There'll be some tinkering, and ultimately, if bishops want to approve it, they'll again have to get that 2/3 vote with consultation from Vatican officials. So it's a fairly complicated process, the beginnings of which we're just seeing go into place now.
And when you say bishops, you mean American bishops, yeah?
Yeah, American bishops.
Now, I know Pope Francis has been pretty quiet about Biden recently, but has he made any statements in the past that might give you some clue as to what his viewpoint might be if he's asked to give approval about a statement like we're talking about?
Yeah, I would never claim to speak for the Pope, but we have seen signals from the Vatican that they did not want U.S. bishops to go down this path. There seems to be a reluctance from Pope Francis to other Vatican officials that when it comes to the Eucharist and politicians, that they don't want to use the Eucharist in a political way, that they don't want to use it as a reward or a punishment. So I think there has been some efforts by the Vatican to kind of influence this decision to say maybe slow down, don't go down this path. But now that the path has started, there are still options for Rome to get involved. And I suspect there will be some attempts behind the scenes to sort of maybe soften the language, soften the calls to deny politicians communion. But I suspect there'll be very little public statements coming from Rome on this topic.
Now, I believe that the Catechism in the Catholic Church says that formal cooperation with an abortion leads potentially to excommunication. But does being a pro-choice politician who advocates for pro-choice laws necessarily qualify as formal cooperation with an abortion?
Yeah, these are questions that canon lawyers spend time debating and trying to figure out what the answer is. For a long time in the United States, you had Catholic political leaders who considered themselves pro-choice take a position saying that they were personally opposed to abortion, but that they represented a constituency that had more diverse views, so they wouldn't seek to impose their own religious beliefs on their constituents. That's a position President Biden took for a long time. His position on abortion has liberalized a bit in recent years, where he once supported restrictions on federal money being used to pay for abortions. He no longer supports that restriction. Whether a support for abortion rights equates to that definition of kind of cooperating in abortion, I don't know the answer to that. And I think there's a lot of people who believe it does. We've seen some conservative bishops say that he should not receive communion. A Catholic pro-choice politician should not receive communion if they support abortion rights. But others say, no, it is more complicated in a complex society like the United States, where there are a whole range of opinions. And a Catholic political leader is called to represent all different kinds of beliefs. So I think it's an open question that people of good faith in the church just don't agree with.
Michael, why is it that abortion is seen as so much worse by the Catholic Church than, say, the death penalty or collateral damage in wars?
Yeah, this has been an interesting part of this debate, where there is no disagreement among bishops when it comes to their views on abortion. I think there's pretty universal pro-life beliefs among U.S. bishops. There's just a different approach to how do you interact with political leaders. And the church, including Pope Francis, have been very clear that abortion is something different from other issues, that there is something intrinsic about abortion that makes it a unique life issue. Here in the United States, that means that bishops have said it's their preeminent social justice issue. Pope Francis has not gone that far. He's talked about the death penalty. He says that that is never admissible, which is a change from previous popes. So there is something about abortion in the United States and the Catholic Church that does attract this level of scrutiny that other issues do not. We haven't seen any sort of cohesive effort among U.S. bishops to deny communion to politicians who support the death penalty, even though I will add that U.S. bishops have been very clear they are against the death penalty. They've released many statements against the previous administration who championed the death penalty. So it's a complicated issue. I think the disagreement, though, is not about what bishops think about abortion or the death penalty. They're pretty united, but how do you apply those teachings in a concrete way?
Now, Michael, my understanding is it doesn't really matter what this statement will eventually say. The decision about whether to give Biden communion will be made by his local bishop. My question, though, is there any way that the Catholic Church can force a local bishop to either grant or deny communion?
That's exactly right. Even the bishops who are supporting this document have admitted or have stated that it ultimately is up to the local bishop. And in President Biden's case, that means the Cardinal of Washington, D.C., Cardinal Wilton Gregory, who during the debate about this statement, said he would not vote in favor of proceeding down this path. He said in the past that he would not deny communion to President Biden. The president spends weekends in his home in Delaware. There's a new bishop who will become head of that church in the coming weeks. He has signaled that he too does not want to go down this path of denying communion to President Biden. So in a sense, this is an issue that, at least as things stand now, we're not going to see the president being denied communion in either of his homes. And no, there's very little that a bishops' conference can do when it comes to pressuring individual bishops. Ultimately, this will be a resource. Even the people backing the statement say that this is a teaching resource for bishops, but no, they cannot force an individual bishop to take a stand one way or another.
Michael O'Loughlin, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back, and thanks to Casey Briggs for doing a sterling job of impersonating John Barron. He even got the glasses. But now it is time to cozy up to our fake fireplace for a fake fireside chat. And joining me this week is the one and only Dr. Julia Baird, author and host of The Drum. Julia, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Pleasure to be here. Didn't know it was fake, so now I'm feeling TV cooler than before.
Is all a lie. Now, you've just seen what we said about the Catholic Church. You saw the interview. Unlike me, you are religious, although not Catholic. So I'm interested, someone who might have some clue what they're talking about, unlike me. What's your reaction to it all?
Well, I do always have a problem when there's political posturing, which this is what it is, because it's not going to end up, he's still going to get communion because his local bishop is like, I'm down with you getting that. So posturing on this in the sense of exclusion. Now, and also why does this only apply to politicians, or as they've said, did they say cultural, political, parochial leaders? That's especially when the world just just recently has seen Boris Johnson get married. The Abbey was kind of kept clear for him. Yes. He's a man who's who's had an interesting past relationships-wise. Yes. We know his partner's Catholic, but he's been divorced. So it does seem like one world leader is being picked on and not the others.
What about the argument, look, no one is more high profile outside the Pope himself as a Catholic than Joe Biden. He's very Catholic, and he doesn't seem to understand what the Catholic teachings are.
Well, no, he has a different view on the Catholic teachings to those of the Vatican. So 70% of American Catholics think that Roe v. Wade shouldn't be overturned. So actually he's in line with mainstream American Catholic opinion, just not that espoused by the hierarchy. And I understand that there is an objection to that. I understand they want to make a point on that, but I think it's really unfortunate, especially when there was such turmoil over the evangelicals and their support for Trump, who had not been known for his faith before he went into politics, that it all boils down endlessly to a control of, reproduction and women's bodies. I think a message of exclusion around that particular issue is kind of unfortunate and may actually herald a movement further towards the Republicans by the Catholics. Which, I mean, I don't know what you think the consequences of that are going to be politically. I mean, Biden got, half the Catholic vote last time, I think? Yeah. Right.
It's interesting that when you talk about Catholics in America, there's quite a stark division between white Catholics and non-white Catholics. Non-white Catholics tend to be Democrat. They tend to be Latino. Yep. Whereas white Catholics have gone from, I think it was about 10 years ago, 4 in 10 were Republicans, now 6 in 10 are Republicans. They're becoming increasingly Republican. So there is a trend going on there, just amongst white Catholics.
Right. I just feel if you put in a room 5 of the most powerful female Catholics that we know and 5 of the most powerful male Catholics, the women, of course, not being part of the hierarchy, and say there is one issue we can hassle the president on, just one thing. Is it going to be the death penalty? Is it going to be immigration rights? Will it be healthcare? Will it be violence against women? Will it be abortion? I'd be really interested to see if we had the same emphasis placed, because I think this is something where the hierarchy of the church does actually differ from the mainstream of it.
Interestingly, there's actually many more Democratic Congress people who are Catholic than Republican Congress people.
Yeah,
It's
right.
Like 90-something to 60-something from memory.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you the same question I asked during the interview, which I can't get past, which is, what is it about abortion? Like in terms of the Catholic, I know you're not a Catholic, but still, you have studied religion, unlike me. What is it about abortion? Because to me, okay, I get that they see it as murder, but when you declare a war, where on say unjust grounds, I understand the just war, but if you declare a dodgy war, and you know there are going to be thousands, tens of thousands of innocents killed during that war, why is that not worse than abortion? I don't get that.
With collateral damage.
Yeah.
Because all the churches have long held like the control of women and their reproductive function as being something that's really core, and male kind of rule of those bodies as well has been really cool, really central to it. I mean, it's like straight up patriarchy 101. It really is.
You might be giving the same answer to this question, but it's another thing which I raised before, but I didn't really get much of an answer from, which is the results versus the theory argument. It's one thing to say we do not believe in abortion, we think it's murder. If that's the case, then from a utilitarian point of view, isn't it better if there's less abortions? Right. And there is countless studies that show that number of abortions is directly tied to the amount of health insurance there is. Right. The more health insurance there is, the less abortions there are, which is why abortions tend to go down under Democratic presidents, because they're pushing more health insurance. They tend to go up again under Republican presidents. Right. So once again, I don't understand why they're more concerned about the theory of whether you support allowing people to have abortions or not, versus the practice on how many abortions there are. Do you have any thoughts
in terms
about
of
that?
how important, especially family planning, which is constantly under assault and politicised and weaponised for all of those reasons? No, I agree with that. I mean, the fact that it boils down to simply almost the end result and not the preventative measures. But I really do understand why people have fundamental objections to it, or questions of conscience, or and they see it a question of snuffing out life. But the issue is whether what it means to impose that belief on everyone else, and what we know historically and culturally comes as a consequence of imposing that belief on everyone else. It doesn't bring the number of abortions down. It does bring the number of deaths and health complications of women up. And frankly, it's a massively distracting political issue. And I think that that's been one thing in Australia. We have been fortunate that it hasn't driven our politics with such a passionate intensity as it has in the US.
My final question about this topic is, you mentioned right at the top that you thought it was a political move from the Catholic Church. Now, like I said, a lot of Democrat Congress people are Catholics, and what some of them are saying is, well, let's take away their tax exempt status. If they're going to play politics, then let's treat them like they're a political organisation. Do you think morally that would be an appropriate thing to do? Or do you think it's messing around with religion from politicians?
No, I'm noticing the same thing here. People talking a lot about tax exempt status now when it comes to, when we're talking about LGBTQI rights and women and messages of acceptance or exclusion or otherwise. So yeah, I think that's an inappropriate response. I think that's kind of a bullying back again. And one thing I've always really loved about the US is the plurality of the expression of belief, and all different kinds of belief. I mean, Obama as president talked about how strong his doubts were, and yet he lived on or prayed on regardless. And I was quite fascinated by that, because I felt that that's something that you can do in the US. In a way that you can't necessarily. Here we have a much more black and white way of talking about faith. Yeah. So yeah, I think that would be. I think it'd be unfortunate, because I think he's a man of faith.
Okay, let's change tax. We've been talking largely us about the filibuster for months now, but on the very day when this has become such a big issue, well, the very week it's become such a big issue, we saw a bipartisan deal over infrastructure. Now, it's not home yet. They might still fall apart, but at least there's the makings of a good faith deal here. So does that prove there's no need to get rid of the filibuster? Everything's fine.
I have to be honest with you. I like after reading through the fors and the against of the filibuster thing, there's so much uncertainty about what its eradication would actually do. Like for one term, sure, we can be certain, but beyond that, I don't know what your views are.
My views with the filibuster is that if what it did was promote debate, then I'd be all for it. But I actually think it kills debate. I think it does the direct opposite. Like filibuster cuts off debate. We saw that this week when they were talking about the voting rights bill. But when they introduced it, they weren't introducing the bill, they were introducing a debate about the bill. And you could have talked about any voting rights reform. You could have had Joe Manchin's. The Republicans have voting rights reforms as well. They could have talked about them. No, the filibuster cut off the opportunity for debate.
Right.
And so to me, I feel like it doesn't. In fact, I'll tell you what, an argument that people often use with the filibuster is they say that it promotes moderation. But I don't think it does promote moderation. I'll tell you what I think it promotes. I think it promotes executive action. Because when you can't do anything as a legislature, what happens is the president just starts signing executive orders. And we've seen this increasingly over the last 20 years. Presidents becoming almost dictators with their executive orders because they can't get anything through legislature. And that to me is, ironically, Congress loses power as a result of the Senate filibuster.
Right.
And I think that's a shame because the president already has too much power in my view.
Don't you think it's almost an exercise in competitive bladder control? Ultimately, Rand Paul at the end of his, what was it, almost 13 hours, and he says, all right, there's many reasons I've discovered that it's difficult to filibuster, and one of them is going to force me to leave now, and he gets this huge applause. Wendy Davis, when she was on, filibustering on abortion rights, it was against more restrictive abortion laws, and what, she was wearing sneakers the whole time.
Look, that's the classic talking filibuster. If they did talking filibusters all the time, I'd see a certain merit to that.
Right.
But they don't.
What's the merit? What's the merit to a 12-hour talk?
That you only hold up the Senate when you've got skin in the game. That it costs you something. It costs you not just time and physical labour, but also it costs you being on TV looking like an idiot, and draws attention to the issue. People go, okay, why are they talking for 12 hours? It's because of this issue. Are they being foolish here? Then it will cost you potentially popularity because people don't like obstruction. So if you have to put your skin in the game, that's one thing.
Or the reverse. Like Wendy Davis was applauded globally.
Absolutely. So if you put yourself out there, that's one thing. But the way the filibuster often works is no one talks. Just Mitch McConnell just says filibuster and that's it. They move on. So it costs no one anything. It's really easy. So I think they're two different things. I think they're both a problem.
Right.
But I think the massive problem is the one where they don't talk at all. That's my view. Kirsten Sinema put out an op-ed saying all the reasons why she thinks filibusters are great. And let me throw one or two at you here. Some of her arguments. She says that the best way to achieve durable, lasting results is through bipartisan cooperation, and so you should enforce the filibuster to create bipartisanship. What do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know if the filibuster is the best way to create bipartisanship. The question is if it actually obstructs anything getting done. Isn't that the issue?
Well, the thing is, I feel like with this that what is not realised is there is a lot of bipartisanship in the Senate. Like, people think they don't do anything. They do. Right. They pass a lot of bills. Just the bills that no one cares about. The stuff that people actually care about, that gets filibustered. And so you end up with a situation where people become discouraged about the state of democracy and they think nothing's happening when things are actually happening. So ironically, the filibuster actually covers up an effective Senate and makes it look dysfunctional.
Yeah, and no better than in the last kind of couple of weeks when we're talking about voting rights.
Yes.
So it actually looks like it. But don't you think the voting rights legislation was actually too ambitious and trying to cover too much ground? That should have been redrafted?
I've said on the show many times, I do not like the For the People Act. I've got a bunch of problems with the For the People Act.
Yeah.
I think Joe Manchin's compromise was a great compromise, and I wish I had the time to take you through bit by bit, but we have about 30 seconds left, so I cannot tell you. But anyway, thank you so much for visiting Flame America, Dr. Julia
It's been
Baird.
a great pleasure.
Before we go, we do need to say R.I.P. Champ, who was a very good boy. And also, we are about to take a break for 3 weeks, summer break, kind of, for us. not summer for Australia.
Time at home.
And also we're in lockdown. Oh, God. But we'll see you in 3 weeks. I think there'll be one last pet podcast. I'm going to try and get it up through the lockdown, which you'll be able to find here. Otherwise, we'll see you with Johnny B in that chair in 3 weeks' time. See you later.